Every generation has its own language of leadership. For some, it's about hierarchy and results, the classic drive and deliver. For others, it's about purpose, connection, and belonging. And lately, we've been hearing about this shift, how Gen Z is changing the way we think about work. But what if it isn't rebellion? What if it's translation? This is Frontline Insights, the podcast where we explore the human side of leadership and change. I'm your host, Kenis Folk, and today we're talking about empathy in leadership. Not as a soft skill, but as a real strength. My guest, Jason Vicks, has spent his career learning from and now mentoring leaders who understand that empathy isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Today, we're going to explore how quiet strength shapes culture, how a new generation is defining what leadership looks like, and why empathy might be the bridge that connects us all. Jason, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome. You've been watching this shift unfold up close. What do you think is really underneath it?
Hey, Kenneth, thanks so much for having me. When I think about Gen Z, the first thing I think that comes to mind for me is that this generation has experienced so many changes that are happening so rapidly, much more than like the changes that my generation had to encounter when I was their age, whether that's technology or how they interact socially, right? It's just constant change all the time for Gen Z. They are going to be 30% of the workforce by the year 2030. And that really means that they're at the forefront of shifting the way that we work and driving changes in what they expect from leadership. And because they're so used to experiencing constant change all the time, I actually think that they expect to be the catalyst for change in their professional roles. I think Gen Z is just asking questions that maybe, I don't know, like my generation was either too timid or afraid or even just flat out forgot to ask. I think a lot of people from my generation may see it as entitlement or resistance, but I think that this generation is just being fearless when it comes to challenging all norms, but particularly with how culture works in business. I don't really think that they're pushing back for the sake of pushing back. It's more about they're pushing for clarity. They want to know the purpose behind the work, not just the process to get it done. You know, they really just want to know that they have a purpose in that. And I can completely understand why that may feel unfamiliar to leaders who grew up in the culture that I did, which was much more just about getting things done as fast as you can get things done.
Well, for sure. Yeah. That's such a refreshing take, right? It's not about the resistance, it's about understanding the why. So, what do you think experienced leaders sometimes misread in that? The moments that come across as pushback when it might actually be something else.
Yeah. So there are so many misconceptions about this style of leadership, honestly. I've heard a ton, like whether it means empathy, meaning that you have to agree with everyone that you come into contact with in a professional setting, or empathy being too emotional for the workplace, or empathetic leaders not being able to be firm when they need to be firm. I really just believe that this type of leadership is, again, at the forefront of what this younger generation expects to receive. And I think that the businesses that are really great at recognizing this and making this a part of their identity are going to be the ones that really drive success and innovation in the future. Empathy isn't softness or weakness. In business, it's really more about structure. So leaders from my generation that may have a few things just kind of lost in translation when it comes to these techniques, a lot of old school servant leadership principles and what this new generation is looking for from leadership may mostly be the same thing, but just a change in vocabulary. So, So, Kenis, I know that you're a mom.
Yes.
So I know that you can probably relate to this. I'm sure that there have been some times where you and your daughter were maybe trying to get to the same place, but kind of talking past each other, right? So I do think that like a lot of this gets lost in translation, where my generation might have said, we need support. Gen Z will say they need psychological safety.
Mm-hmm.
My generation maybe said we need flexibility. Gen Z would maybe say that they need more autonomy. At the end of the day, like both sides are really talking about things that are just rooted in trust and about creating a space where people really feel empowered, not just managed.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier, empathy as structure, and I really like that because it's not slowing things down, it's what allows teams to move faster and with more purpose.
Hmm.
So let's rewind a little bit and just talk a little bit about something that you mentioned before, that empathy was modeled for you long before you ever set foot in the corporate world.
Mm, yeah.
You grew up around educators and civil servants, people who led through service and through care. So tell me a little bit about that. What did you see in how they worked and how they connected with others?
Yeah, yeah. So both my mom and my grandmother were public school teachers, and
That's
they,
beautiful.
yeah, well, it was pretty cool. Although they did know all of my teachers growing up, so that part wasn't that great. But,
Oh, yeah, I would hate that.
but but I really got a view of their personalities and how they worked. My grandmother was different from my mom. She was really reserved. She was, kind of soft spoken, very introspective, you know. But my mom was really charismatic and energetic. You could call her a bubbly person, and that would apply, right? That's just who she was with anyone, whether that be a student or, somebody at the grocery store, didn't matter. The thing that they had in common, though, was a passion for learning, for sharing knowledge, and finding ways to reach and inspire their students. I didn't realize until I was much older and starting my career that the way that they were able to connect with so many different types of kids, all of which who had different ways of learning, was by having the empathy to understand who they were, what they might be going through at that time, how they were open to receiving information, and then using that to connect to the things that they really wanted them to learn. Those were just really early life lessons for me that taught me that connections that matter and last really start with listening to people. You give people a voice without judgment, and they tend to feel seen. It's just really stuck with
Yeah.
me, and it really influences the way that I work and lead today.
That is really heartwarming, and it's such a great reminder that real leadership often starts at home through consistency and trust and everyday example, which is what your mom and your grandmother provided for you. So, do you think that has shaped how you show up for your own teams today?
Yeah, completely. Just really, again, in the way that I try to participate in active listening to whatever they are trying to communicate to me, and really just seeing them as people first. That is definitely something that started with the way that I was able to see how my mom and my grandmother were able to interact with people throughout their lives. And it
Mm-hmm.
really causes and influences me to try to drive worthwhile connections with everyone that I work with.
Yeah. Seeing people as people first is like at the core of empathy, really. And it sounds like empathy has been woven into everything, not just something that you kind of added on later, but that mindset can really get tested once you step into the corporate environment, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely,
So
absolutely.
let's fast forward. You've entered the corporate life with this foundation of service and empathy, and suddenly it's all about numbers and speed and scale. So what was that like for you?
It was a wake up call. It was it was a lot early in my career. When I started out, I think that the innovation of, dashboards, KPIs, working for the sake of being as fast as possible, all of that was really kind of just starting. And don't get me wrong, I love a good metric, right? But like a lot at the time, like a lot of these tools were so new and innovative and great ways to digest a lot of information in a short amount of time. But over time, the impact that we saw became kind of negative because we were having
Yeah.
so much focus on metrics and speed that we really lost the human connection that we all had in working together. People felt less inspired, and that definitely had a negative impact on both performance and the quality of work.
Oh, I'm sure that had to have been tough because when everything becomes measurable, it's easy to lose the space for connection. So, what did you notice about how that disconnection affected performance? You mentioned it affected performance earlier.
Yeah, yeah, I think there are so many different productivity killers that we come across in, our day to day, right? Like different things that may trip us up or different problems that we don't anticipate. But the biggest productivity killer that I've come across is disconnection.
Mm.
And empathy, working with empathy, brings clarity. And in business, clarity is what really drives performance.
Exactly. Empathy drives clarity, and clarity drives results. Yes. It makes me think about the people who helped reintroduce that idea for you, the mentors who reminded you that people perform best when they feel seen.
Mm.
So, you've had some great mentors, people who led quietly but powerfully. Who stands out to you as someone who showed you what that looks like in practice, in real life?
I could probably think of two. I had two mentors, excuse me, that really influenced my early career,
Okay.
made everyone feel that their role was vital to the success of the team and that that team was vital to the success of the company. He just really, really made everyone feel seen and vital to what we were doing. Uh, the
That's
second,
critical. Yeah.
it's everything. Um, so another mentor that had a huge impact on my development was, ironically enough, a consultant. During my
Okay.
first project management role, I was starting out as an end user training lead on an SAP ERP transition. The
Okay.
first 2 weeks I was on that project were the most contentious meetings I have ever been a part of. We were behind schedule, we were over budget. Everyone, kind of had knives out for everyone at
The
that
story
point.
gets better, right?
Yeah. But he had a really unique approach of kind of breaking through that negative energy. And he wanted to know and understand the things that were just going wrong for their end of the project and how that might correlate to the work that we're doing on the end user training side of the project.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And we heard
he,
you, right?
yeah, for sure. And in doing that, he changed our dynamic with people that were, you know, in a really negative space.
Sounds like you had some really good mentors, some great experiences, and that balance that they brought, the accountability and the care, that feels a lot like what our younger leaders are trying to express now. The language may be new, but the
Hmm.
values are the same. Jason, you mentor a lot of early career professionals,
Hmm.
especially Gen Z, and they are very purpose driven and curious and not shy about asking why. So,
Absolutely
what have
not.
you learned from them? What's surprised you or inspired you about how they think about leadership?
Yeah, I think the thing that really stands out to me the most about the young professionals that I've had the pleasure of working with these days is that they are not afraid to challenge assumptions. They always ask why before they ask how, right?
Hmm.
And they're not doing that out of,
Well, I think they
some kind
start
of
that when they're like little, but yes.
they do, but like they're it's it's very much like, again, like when they join a company, it's like I guess they're in that same mindset. Like everything's new. They want to know how everything works. But they're
Hmm.
not, asking those questions really out of defiance. It's discernment. They want alignment, not just direction. And I really actually think that's very refreshing. It reminds me of my roots and the things that mattered the most to me when I started my career. And it also really reminds me a lot of Blue Skies and what we try to be as a company. We help companies that are going through complex transformations, but we don't lose our heart and humanity in doing that work. And again, I think that's really at the forefront of what this new generation is looking for in their careers, like whether we're
Absolutely.
talking about unbossing or servant leadership, all of these things are just rooted in trust over control.
Absolutely. It's funny. So that term unbossing always sounds so strange. It's new and very Gen Z, but it's really
Hmm.
just a new expression of servant leadership. So, like you said, it's not about defiance, it's ownership through purpose, leading by
Exactly.
trust versus title, which is what we grew up on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I would say that again, it really kind of goes back to that thing that we were talking about earlier, where there's, those things are what Gen Z is chasing right now is very similar to those old school servant leader principles. And maybe empathy is the translator for all of us, Maybe that's what we need to hear the intent behind the words that we're saying past each other.
Yeah, yeah. Still, there's sometimes friction between those generations. I think both sides often want the same things, meaning trust, impact, but they describe them differently.
Yeah.
Do you
Well,
see
I
that
mean,
as well? That it's
for
not just
sure.
disagreement. Like you said, like empathy is just translation, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Like, I may say ownership, but what they hear is overload, right? But
Mm,
when they say balance, some leaders might hear lack of drive. We're chasing the same things. Like you said, impact, trust, and meaning.
that is such a clear way to put it. It's not that people are misaligned. They're really just using different words for the same thing.
Yeah,
And like you said, empathy becomes the translator, the
right.
thing that helps both sides hear intention instead of assumption.
Exactly.
So let's talk about what that looks like when it actually works, when empathy builds that bridge instead of highlighting the gap. Can you share an example of when that bridge really worked? A moment where trust and empathy across generations made a team stronger or faster?
But yeah, I'm reminded of actually a recent example with a Gen Z colleague who really pushed to understand the why before committing to the act of the how we got something done. And that was really refreshing for me. So we were working on a role remediation tool that we are trying to roll out to a few different business groups. And we were pretty content on rolling out what we had. So this analyst, before we actually rolled out this tool, she asked about how the stakeholders that would use it would interact with it. And that was not a question that any of us had really thought of or or worked into our scenario building out this tool.
Interesting.
So we really couldn't answer that because we weren't the stakeholders. So what we decided to do was actually pull in some members of the super user network that we
Uh
were
huh.
attached to, and they essentially worked with us to talk about how they would use this tool, how people from different business groups might use it differently.
Mm
And
hmm.
that really gave us enough to actually make something that would have been, probably just okay and good enough into something that was actually very useful for these teams and really help with eliminating a lot of the downstream impacts that we see with people not being able to understand, what roles they need for what privileges in the system they need to execute.
Got
So
it.
again, it really started with this person asking why and really having the empathy to understand, I'm not using this tool, but I want this to work for the people that are. Maybe we should pull them in to get their thoughts on how we should do this. That moment really just touched home with me what this generation's all about when it comes to working and literally everything that we've been talking through during our time here. They care enough about people to put themselves in their shoes and be as empathetic as they can in having that influence their work. And I actually think that's really admirable about this generation.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Empathy isn't just emotional, it's structural. It holds teams together under pressure, and it reminds us that leadership isn't about control anymore. It's about collaboration and connection and caring and seeing people as people. So, maybe servant leadership was never outdated. It just needed a new language, right?
That's right.
And
That's right.
empathy, That might be the language that keeps us connected no matter how work keeps changing. Jason, thank you so much for this conversation and for showing that empathy isn't the opposite of performance. It's what makes it possible.
Thanks again for having me, Kenis.
Thanks for joining us on Frontline Insights, where we connect the dots between people, change, and excellence. If you enjoyed today's episode, follow or subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and stay tuned for more stories from the front lines of leadership.